The Galactic Council Hall was alive with the hum of confidence and unyielding ambition. The highest leaders of the Empire convened, each brimming with anticipation as they discussed the prospects of their next conquest. A sense of invincibility permeated the room. Species after species had bowed to their might, and humanity, young and inexperienced in their eyes, would be no different. In the midst of their deliberations, one figure stood apart, silent yet vigilant. He was General Kravark, a war strategist whose name was synonymous with victory across countless battles. His eyes flickered as he listened to his peers talk about humanity as if they were little more than a nuisance to be brushed aside. The arrogance in their tone was palpable, and it troubled him more deeply than he let on. An advisor spoke up, confidently proposing strategies to subdue Earth's inhabitants swiftly. Others chimed in, sharing the belief that humanity's rudimentary technology and small numbers would make this a brief and effortless campaign. Smug smiles passed around the room as they discussed plans for victory parades and new territories. Then Kravark cleared his throat. Silence fell. When he spoke, his voice held a weight that demanded attention. Esteemed council members, I urge you to reconsider underestimating humanity. They are not like others. His words hung heavy in the air, met initially with baffled looks and stifled laughter. One council member raised an eyebrow. Surely, General, you don't fear a species so primitive they still rely on combustion engines. Kravark held his gaze steady. It is not fear that drives my caution. It is experience. He paused, seeing he had their attention. Humans possess qualities that defy our understanding. I have seen them act with a courage bordering on recklessness, an adaptability that can't be quantified. To dismiss these attributes as irrelevant would be a grave misstep. Another council member scoffed, unable to contain his amusement. You speak of them as if they're some legendary foe, General. Yet they lack the power, the technology, the numbers. They are insignificant. Insignificant? Kravark's voice grew sharper. That is precisely the kind of arrogance that blinds even the mightiest of empires. He leaned forward, eyes narrowed. Humans do not need superior technology to survive. They thrive in adversity, and they fight with a tenacity that borders on madness. I have seen it with my own eyes. A murmur rippled through the room. Some council members exchanged skeptical glances, others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The general's words, delivered with uncharacteristic intensity, had struck a nerve. Kravark continued, his voice low and unwavering. On one of our campaigns, I witnessed humans outmaneuver a force far superior to their own. They used the terrain to their advantage, exploiting every shadow, every gust of wind. They improvised with whatever they could find, turning it into weaponry that defied logic. Their tactics were unpredictable, their courage unbreakable. When other species would have surrendered or fled, they advanced. He saw doubt flicker in the eyes of some council members, though a few remained unconvinced. One scoffed again. And yet they are mortal, bound by the same physical limitations as any organic species. We have faced worse and emerged victorious. Kravark shook his head slowly, his expression grave. Mortality is not a limitation for them, it is a catalyst. When a human faces death, they do not crumble. They grow fiercer, driven by a will to survive that I have never seen in any other species. They do not simply fight, they endure. And their endurance is unsettling. He paused, letting his words settle over the council. His gaze swept across the room, observing the ripple of discomfort that his words had provoked. If we choose to engage them, we must be prepared for a campaign that will not go as planned. Humans have a way of adapting, of bending the very rules of warfare to their favor. They thrive on challenges and grow stronger the more desperate the situation becomes. A younger council member leaned forward, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. Are you suggesting, General, that we are not capable of outsmarting a species that hasn't even conquered its own solar system? Kravark's gaze was steady, unwavering. Outsmart them? Perhaps. Overpower them? Certainly. But I warn you, dismissing their spirit will be our undoing. Humans do not fight for mere survival. They fight for each other, for ideals, for hope. And that, I believe, is their greatest weapon. A weapon more formidable than any technology or fleet. Silence stretched across the hall, the once confident murmurs replaced with a thoughtful hush. The words of the general lingered, a cautionary echo that seeped into the minds of those who had scoffed just moments before. At last, Kravark stood, his final words a solemn warning. I have seen the chaos they bring, the fires that cannot be extinguished, the resolve that does not falter. Do not mistake their appearance of weakness for a lack of strength. The humans are dangerous, not for what they are, but for what they could become if provoked. He glanced around the room one last time, his expression as steely as the resolve in his voice. To awaken humanity's wrath would be to ignite a force that will not be easily quelled. Underestimating them could cost us more than we are prepared to lose. With that, the general took his seat, leaving the council in a silence thick with contemplation, unease prickling at the edges of their arrogance. General Kravark leaned forward, his eyes reflecting memories of a time when he had once underestimated humanity's potential for chaos. The council waited, a few members visibly skeptical, others leaning in, sensing that this tale might hold more weight than his earlier warnings. Kravark began, his voice tinged with a respect uncommon in tales of his past enemies. During a campaign on the Fringe Worlds, I encountered human soldiers for the first time. Our forces had complete technological superiority. We had numerical advantage, air control, and intel on every inch of the terrain. By every strategic measure, we were certain of a swift victory. But humanity, they defied every expectation. He paused, his expression darkening as he recalled those fateful days. When we launched our initial offensive, they didn't react as predicted. Instead of retreating or surrendering, they launched attacks from impossible angles, using terrain we considered useless to mount counteroffensives. Their forces were smaller, less equipped, and lacking any semblance of proper coordination, at least on the surface. It was reckless, a style of fighting that no trained strategist would employ. Yet it worked. Kravark's gaze swept across the council members, many of whom looked unconvinced, but he pressed on. They turned their surroundings into weapons, using their knowledge of the land to disrupt and confuse our forces. They exploited every gap, every momentary lapse in our perimeter, slipping through our lines like shadows. It was as though the chaos fueled them, giving them strength rather than causing panic. He explained how his forces, methodical and well-disciplined, began to falter under the pressure. His soldiers weren't used to an enemy that moved in erratic patterns, ignoring the conventional wisdom of structured lines and formations. Humans broke all the rules. They operated in a manner we couldn't understand. Our calculations, our strategies, all were thrown into disarray. Their leaders made split-second decisions that we would never consider, decisions so irrational they seemed absurd, and yet they succeeded. One council member frowned, still doubtful. And you're saying their reckless tactics were enough to make a difference? Kravark nodded slowly. Yes. To them, nothing was out of bounds. Their courage bordered on madness, their tactics on desperation, yet they thrived in that very chaos. I saw them push forward, never retreating, even when logic dictated they should have. They'd engage with a tenacity that was unnerving. Their eyes held no fear, only a fierce determination to succeed, even at great cost. He continued, his voice weighted with respect he hadn't intended to feel. We had expected them to break, but the opposite happened. The longer we fought, the more intense they became, as if each fallen soldier strengthened the resolve of the next. We began to lose control, forced to react to their every unpredictable move. They turned simple objects into weapons, shards of metal, pieces of debris, anything they could wield. They didn't just fight to win, they fought as if each battle was their last, with a recklessness that proved effective in a way I hadn't seen before. The room was quiet now, the council members hanging on to his every word, the earlier skepticism melting into an uncomfortable silence. When I finally ordered a retreat to regroup and reassess, it was not out of weakness or lack of firepower, Kravark admitted, but because my forces were exhausted, mentally and physically. Humans had worn us down, not with strength but with sheer willpower and an unyielding resistance. We realized that conventional tactics would not work, that this enemy fought not with logic, but with something far more dangerous, instinct and a drive to survive against all odds. He looked around the room, eyes piercing. It's easy to dismiss them as primitive or impulsive. But their unpredictability is a strength, one that our rigid tactics cannot counter easily. They don't simply endure, they adapt on the fly, creating solutions from whatever is around them. It was as if they looked at our superior technology and didn't see an obstacle but a challenge, something they could turn to their advantage. A council member leaned back, visibly uncomfortable, but trying to maintain his skepticism. So they're adaptable. That's commendable, but it hardly means they're a true threat to the Empire. Kravark's expression hardened. Perhaps it's difficult to comprehend, but humans don't think the way we do. To them, survival isn't just a matter of outgunning the enemy. It's about turning every weakness into a weapon, using every disadvantage as an advantage. They exploit gaps we don't even notice, force us into positions we hadn't considered, and operate with a fluidity that makes them dangerously unpredictable. He allowed a moment for his words to sink in, observing the looks of concern on the faces around him. You have never faced an enemy like this, one who doesn't follow any standard of war we know. When we think they're about to retreat, they advance. When we believe they're weakening, they strike harder. They operate outside logic, and that is why they succeed against forces far greater than themselves. With a final, solemn tone, he concluded. In the end, I realized we had not been fighting a mere enemy. We were battling an idea, an unbreakable will that couldn't be suppressed by technology or tactics alone. It was then that I understood the real danger of humanity, not in their strength or intelligence, but in their refusal to be conquered, their ability to create chaos where none existed. The council sat in silence, their initial confidence now shadowed by the general's chilling description of an enemy who fought as though they had nothing to lose. The council chamber was tense. Kravark's earlier words hung in the air, but he sensed they hadn't yet grasped the depth of his warning. He began to speak once more, his voice steady yet filled with a respect that surprised even himself. Let me tell you about humanity under pressure, he said, his gaze scanning the room. This is no ordinary species. Even when they are cornered, outnumbered, and outgunned, they do not succumb. They adapt, they resist, and they become something more than just soldiers in battle. He paused, recounting another encounter, a planet deep within Empire territory, occupied by his forces. The environment was harsh, an unforgiving terrain that even seasoned Imperial forces found challenging. They had believed humans would be easy to control, certain that the land itself would help crush any resistance. Yet, to their shock, the humans turned that very landscape to their advantage. Our forces underestimated them, he continued. We thought our control was secure. But these humans, they didn't crumble under the weight of occupation. They fought back quietly at first. Simple acts of defiance, small disruptions. But these minor interferences grew until they became a full-fledged resistance. Kravark's tone grew darker. They used the planet itself as a weapon. Where we saw barren wastelands, they saw cover. Where we saw scarcity, they found resources. They endured conditions we assumed would break their spirits, yet they remained relentless. They weaponized the environment in ways we had not foreseen, traps, ambushes, calculated strikes that crippled our operations. A faint shudder went through a few council members. Kravark could tell his words were starting to sink in. When supplies ran low, they found sustenance where none existed. When their equipment failed, they fashioned tools from whatever they could scavenge. They needed nothing from us, nothing from anyone. Their ability to improvise under impossible conditions made them all the more dangerous. They didn't just fight our soldiers, they fought the very notion of our control over them. He paused, his voice softer now, almost as if he were sharing a closely guarded secret. These humans worked together in a way I had not seen before. Their unity in the face of adversity was something that cannot be explained by strategy or training. They had a bond, an unbreakable determination that made them formidable beyond measure. Every time we thought we had them cornered, they'd slip through, finding strength in each other and in the sheer force of their will. Kravark looked around, seeing some of the council members' expressions shift from skepticism to something bordering on concern. I came to understand that humans are driven by something far deeper than mere survival. They have a sense of purpose, a stubborn loyalty to one another that empowers them. It doesn't matter if they are up against impossible odds. They do not abandon each other. That bond gives them a resilience we had not anticipated. He went on, describing how human resistance on that planet grew until it became an unstoppable force. Despite their smaller numbers and lack of advanced weaponry, they managed to cripple key operations, sabotage supply chains, and create a network of support that ran deeper than any military structure. We captured some of them, he admitted. But even in captivity, they did not break. They showed defiance even when they had no reason to hope. The more we tried to subdue them, the stronger their spirit became. The room was utterly silent as Kravark continued, his voice heavy with respect. They were relentless, using everything they had, everything they found. These humans didn't just survive, they thrived in conditions that would destroy most species. They turned their desperation into a tool, making our control over them tenuous at best. We found ourselves expending more and more resources just to maintain a fragile hold on their territory. He let out a quiet breath, his gaze steady. These humans have something we lack, a resolve that doesn't falter. They don't need superior technology. They don't need vast numbers. Their strength lies in their unity and their ability to endure. They are bound together by something that goes beyond orders or duty, something that makes them capable of resisting even the strongest forces. One council member finally broke the silence, his voice subdued. They sound impossible to conquer. Kravark's eyes narrowed, his voice filled with a grim certainty. Impossible to conquer, yes. Because they refuse to be conquered. They are not bound by our rules or limits. They do not see surrender as an option. They will find any weakness, exploit any opportunity, turn any setback into an advantage. And they do it without hesitation, without doubt. He glanced around the room, his gaze firm and unyielding. You think of them as lesser beings because they lack our technology, because they do not possess fleets or sophisticated weaponry. But that is precisely why they are so dangerous. Their strength lies not in what they have, but in who they are. They do not need the trappings of power, they are power itself, forged in hardship, driven by a spirit that cannot be extinguished. The council members sat in uneasy silence, absorbing the implications of Kravark's words. He could tell they were beginning to understand, that his warnings were starting to shift their perceptions. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper, laced with a finality that left no room for doubt. Underestimating humans is a mistake I will never make again. They may be smaller in number, less equipped, lacking in the resources we take for granted. But that makes them all the more resourceful, all the more determined. They are a force that defies logic, a species that thrives in adversity and cannot be subdued by mere power. He leaned back, his voice a soft, chilling conclusion. If we push them, if we force them to the brink, they will not just survive. They will rise. And they will do whatever it takes, paying any price, to ensure their survival. That is the essence of humanity, a will that cannot be broken, no matter how fierce the storm they face. The room remained still, and Kravark let his words settle in, knowing that, for once, he had made them understand the depths of the threat they faced. Kravark's gaze was unwavering as he surveyed the council, aware that he had to deliver one final warning, a message that would either be heeded or dismissed, yet it demanded their full understanding. He began again, his tone darker, filled with a gravity they could not ignore. I have spoken of their resilience, of their relentless spirit, but there is one aspect of humanity that we have not yet grasped fully, their ability to unite others to their cause. They are not just survivors, they are unifiers. Humanity possesses a remarkable trait, one that turns former enemies into allies. When their backs are against the wall, they inspire loyalty in ways that defy our understanding. The council sat in silence, wary now, sensing that Kravark was about to reveal something even more unsettling. On the fringes of our territories, I witnessed firsthand how humans could forge alliances even with species that once viewed them with hostility. These alliances were not born out of mere necessity or desperation. No, they stemmed from something deeper, respect, earned not by words but by actions. They demonstrate a willingness to stand with others, to protect even those who might seem insignificant. And in return, others rally to their side. Kravark's voice grew colder. We, the Empire, rule through dominance and fear. Humanity, however, operates differently. They see strength not in isolation, but in unity. They have a strange way of turning weakness into power by binding together in a way that is beyond our comprehension. This is what makes them unpredictable and dangerous. He paused, observing the discomfort his words evoked, but he pressed on. In a single conflict, they were able to unite species that had been in centuries-long feuds. Species that had never known peace with each other, species we could never hope to control jointly. Humans brought them together, not with promises or threats, but with sheer determination and a willingness to sacrifice themselves for others. They do not conquer with power, they inspire with something we cannot replicate, a shared vision, a belief that their fight is just. A council member's voice broke through, anxious, yet trying to mask it with a thin veneer of defiance. But how could they command such loyalty from others? We have never seen this trait in any species. Kravark's gaze sharpened, his tone cutting. Because they lead by example. They do not ask others to face dangers they themselves would not. Humans will stand on the front lines, take the first blows, and shield those they have sworn to protect. Their actions instill a loyalty that is unbreakable. To those who have fought alongside them, they are more than allies, they are kindred spirits. They create bonds that we, with all our dominance, cannot fathom. He allowed the silence to settle before continuing. If we provoke humanity, we will not only face their soldiers but the countless allies they have gained. And make no mistake, these alliances are not flimsy agreements. They are bound by trust, forged through shared hardships and battle. We would be fighting a force far greater than their numbers suggest, a coalition of species united under the banner of survival and resistance. And humans would be at the helm, their resolve fueling those who stand with them. Another council member shifted, murmuring under his breath, as though trying to dismiss the general's words. Kravark's voice rose, unwavering and forceful. Dismiss them at your peril. If we ignite this conflict, we will not be facing humanity alone. Their alliances run deep, and those who stand with them will fight with a determination mirroring humanity's own. It will not be a battle of fleets or weapons. It will be a battle of wills, one that will exhaust us in ways we cannot afford. He continued, his voice carrying a grim certainty. And even if we defeat them, we will not break them. Humanity's strength does not rely on their numbers or their technology. It lies in their capacity to endure, to rise again, no matter how many times they fall. They will teach those who follow them to do the same. They will become a legacy of resistance, and that legacy will haunt us long after we believe we have won. The room grew colder as his words settled. Some of the council members glanced at each other, unease visible in their expressions. Kravark could tell that his message was beginning to penetrate their confidence, eroding the illusion of an easy conquest. He leaned forward, voice softer but no less intense. If we proceed, we risk creating a symbol, a cause that will inspire resistance for generations to come. Humanity will not merely fight back, they will become a rallying cry for all who seek freedom from oppression. They will turn into the very thing that topples empires, a unifying force that transcends borders, species, and histories. And their legacy will echo, leaving scars upon our dominion that will not fade. A council member's voice was barely a whisper. And you believe they would do this? Kravark's gaze was steely, his words final. I know they would. Humanity will not be extinguished by force alone. They will fight, survive, and endure. They will inspire others to do the same. And once that fire is lit, it will spread. We cannot control what humanity has begun to ignite, a desire for unity, for resistance, for freedom. They are not just another species. They are a force, one that could change the galaxy itself if provoked. He sat back, letting his words hang in the air. The silence was thick, the council members' earlier bravado shattered, replaced by an unsettling awareness of the risks they faced. Kravark had laid bare the truth, and he knew that whether they heeded his words or not, the choice was now theirs. He had done all he could, issuing a warning that would either protect the Empire from ruin or see it consumed by a force it had failed to understand.